Hey everyone, Kevin here, and welcome to the first video in the Wine 3 lab. This will cover lab basics and help you complete worksheet 1 on lab basics, which is due prior to the start of our in-person labs. These principles will also help you complete the wine, cellar, and lab basics quiz, which you get more points for if you complete before our first lab. So let's get going. We're going to look in this lab basics worksheet about a real-life example, or at least in these slides, we're going to look at this real-life example. And you will take the principles learned here and complete the worksheet 1. So our real-life example is the winemaker tells you to add 30 parts per million of SO2 to 10,000 gallons of Cabernet Sauvignon. You need to add the SO2 as grams of potassium metabisulfite. How do you do this calculation? So there are lots of principles involved here. The first thing to know, briefly, potassium metabisulfite is a powder that we use for adding SO2 to wine. So you may or may not have encountered that in lecture already. But it's just a powder, and it's an easy way to work with SO2. SO2, sulfur dioxide, at room temperature is going to be a gas. And it's very toxic, so we don't really like working with a gas. Some wineries do, and you have to wear a gas mask to work with it. But a much easier way is to just use SO2 in the form of potassium metabisulfite. So we often abbreviate this KMBS for potassium. Potassium is the chemical symbol for, or K is the chemical symbol for potassium. And so it's potassium metabisulfite. And that is just a powder, and we dissolve that in water, and we add that to our wine, and that's how we add SO2 to wine. And it's a nice, easy way to work with SO2 without having to be exposed to SO2 gas. Okay, so in this real-life example, the winemaker says add 30 parts per million of SO2 to 10,000 gallons. Do it in the form of potassium metabisulfite. There are 4 principles that we're going to cover here that help with this calculation. Those 4 principles are addition rates, metric versus English units, conversion factors, and how to make sure I am correct. Okay, here we go. Let's go with addition rates first. An addition rate, also known as a rate of addition, is just the amount of something you're going to add per volume. So let's take an example. Here are 3 actually. Let's look at Kool-Aid first. We might make a quart of Kool-Aid, and the typical rate of addition is 1 cup of sugar for 2 quarts of Kool-Aid, or 2 quarts of water. All right? So the addition rate is in units of cups of sugar per quart of water. It's just the amount of something per volume. The volume here is 2 quarts of water. The amount of something is measured in cups in this case. It's cups of sugar. All right, let's look at the second one here. That's Kool-Aid. Let's look at yeast. We usually add yeast in terms of pounds of yeast per gallon of juice. So it's pounds per gallon. That's a typical measurement you hear winemakers use. And the typical rate of addition is 2 pounds per 1,000 gallons of juice. So our volume is gallons in this case. And the amount of something, which in this case is yeast, would be 2 pounds, and we are here referring to freeze-dried yeast you'd buy from a winery supplier. All right, so the rate of addition is 2 pounds per 1,000 gallons. Third example, adding SO2. We often measure SO2 in milligrams of SO2 per liter. So a typical rate of addition is 30 milligrams per liter. So the volume is liters in this case, and the amount of something, which in this case is SO2, is 30 milligrams per liter. All right, so these are rates of addition. And they're so important in wine because a winemaker will often tell you add 30 milligrams per liter of SO2, you have to figure out how many liters you have in a tank and add 30 milligrams for each liter. So we're going to do an example of that in just a sec. So milligrams per liter is also known as parts per million. All right, so you often hear parts per million, or ppm, in the winemaking world, and just memorize that that is milligrams per liter. All right, so this would be the weight of something, milligrams, divided by a volume. All right, so parts per million in the winemaking world is milligrams per liter. Just memorize that so you know it. We use parts per million most frequently to express the levels of SO2. So when you hear winemakers just say, I added 30 parts SO2, they're talking about parts per million. Okay. So let's take a simple example here using rates of addition. If a winemaker says a rate of addition is 30 milligrams per liter, which as we just defined is 30 parts per million is milligrams per liter, how many milligrams will I add to 1,000 liters? All right, so we have a rate of addition, 30 milligrams for every liter. And here I've got 1,000 liters. So you could think of this as one big tank with 1,000 liters. You could also think about it as 1,000 little 1 liter jars, each of which contains 1 liter of juice or wine. You could have 1,000 of them. For each of those, we're going to add 30 milligrams, right? Because they're 1 liter containers, we're going to add 30 milligrams to each. So it's 30 milligrams per liter times 1,000 liters. And that would be the total milligrams that I would add. All right, so we take our rate of addition, which is the 30 milligrams per liter, and multiply that by our volume, total volume, which in this case is going to be 1,000 liters. And I do the math, and I get 30,000 milligrams. So that would be the weight of the SO2 I weigh out and add. Now, as we mentioned earlier, I'm probably going to use potassium metabisulfite. So this above here, the 30,000 milligrams, that was milligrams of SO2. So later, I'm going to convert that to milligrams of KMBS, okay? So we're going to do this, but this is going to be later in this video, okay? All right, so for now, the most important thing, rates of addition. This is a simple example of how you can apply a rate of addition to a total volume. So in a real-life example, the winemaker tells you to add 30 parts per million of SO2 to 10,000 gallons. So the 30 parts per million is the rate of addition. Okay? So get comfortable with that. So that is rate of addition. The next thing to understand is metric versus English units. That next topic we're going to pick up in video 2. So thanks for watching video 1, and see you in the next one.